So this evening, I will actually be preaching from the text of Job, which Thijs read for us in Dutch. Don't worry, I will also read it in English for us. But first, I will situate it. Many of us are familiar with the story of Job, and that Job is described as blameless at the beginning of the story. And then calamity upon calamity befalls him. All of his children die. He loses virtually all of his wealth. And then he is in this predicament where he has friends who come, and at first they sit with him in his grief, but then commences a discussion, a very heated one, in which they begin to accuse Job of being at fault for all these tragedies. Now we know that he is not at fault at all, as readers of the text, and Job does as well. So he defends himself. But then he also starts to level accusations not only against his friends, but against God. This leveling of accusations against God, there is a term for it. It's called blasphemy. But in my sermon, I have entitled, inspired by Job, A Defense of Blasphemy. Now, Job is accusing God of things, and then finally we come to this interesting passage where he says, "Oh, that my words were written down. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that with an iron pen and with lead they were engraved on a rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God. Whom shall I see on my side? And my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me." So while Job is leveling these accusations against God, that God is unjust, that God has abandoned him, he simultaneously affirms his faith that his Redeemer lives and that God will vindicate him. And here we have an interesting paradox in the text, in which it is through Job's close relationship with God that he can level these strong accusations. It is not from outside of relationship that he lays these blasphemous charges, but it's against the God whom he loves, worships, and knows. And ultimately, as we will see later on, God will vindicate Job, just as Job said he would. Now, this kind of raw, visceral response of Job is echoed in many faith leaders. One recently that comes to mind is the Rabbi Jeffrey Myers, who is the rabbi of Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where what is known as the worst anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history occurred, where a gunman came and murdered 11 Jewish worshipers and injured others. Rabbi Myers is described in the CNN article when he was at this conference. It says, "When the rabbi lies awake at night, the rabbi thinks of Psalm 23, which begins, 'The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.' Well, God, I want," he said at an interfaith service in Pittsburgh, channeling the grief and anger of many Americans. "What I want, you can't give me. You can't return these 11 beautiful souls." Rabbi Myers can speak this way because he does trust God. And we see that there is precedent within this Jewish tradition of speaking this way to God. Now, one of the concerns that is often brought up when these issues come up is that we need to be careful about how we speak to God, because God is, of course, above us. God is great. God is something which we are not. But I have often found that those who try to police language about God are not really trying to defend God. They are usually trying to defend their commonly masculine, fragile egos and the power that they're trying to maintain. Because if God is truly God, if God is truly all-powerful, then why do we have to worry about being honest with him about emotions he's already familiar with? I think a very good example of the anger we can feel, how we want to respond to God, and how God is loving and patient with us is actually found in the book Harry Potter, The Order of the Phoenix. In this, and I've edited it to avoid certain spoilers in case you haven't read it. But Harry has just experienced a great tragedy, and now he is in the office of Albus Dumbledore, the very wise old wizard who is the headmaster at Hogwarts, the School of Magic. And Dumbledore has also been a mentor to Harry. But he sits with Harry in his moment of grief. And the text begins, "I know how you're feeling, Harry," said Dumbledore very quietly. "No, you don't," said Harry, and his voice was suddenly loud and strong. White-hot anger leapt inside him. Dumbledore knew nothing about his feelings. "There is no shame in what you are feeling, Harry," said Dumbledore's voice. "On the contrary, the fact that you can feel pain like this is your greatest strength." Harry felt the white-hot anger lick his insides, blazing in the terrible emptiness, filling him with the desire to hurt Dumbledore for his calmness and his empty words. "My greatest strength, is it?" said Harry, his voice shaking. "You haven't got a clue. You don't know." "What don't I know?" asked Dumbledore calmly. It was too much. Harry turned around, shaking with rage. "I don't want to talk about how I feel, all right?" "Harry, suffering like this proves you are still a man. This pain is part of being human." "Then I don't want to be human," Harry roared, and he seized the delicate silver instrument from the spindle-legged table beside him and flung it across the room. It shattered into 100 tiny pieces against the wall. "I've had enough. I've seen enough. I want out. I want it to end. I don't care anymore." He seized the table on which the silver instrument had stood and threw that too. It broke apart on the floor and the legs rolled in different directions. "You do care," said Dumbledore. Dumbledore had not flinched or made a single move to stop Harry demolishing his office. His expression was calm, almost detached. "You care so much, you feel as though you will bleed to death with the pain of it." "I don't," Harry screamed, so loudly that he felt his throat might tear. And for a second he wanted to rush at Dumbledore and break him too, shatter that calm old face, shake him, hurt him, make him feel some tiny part of the horror inside himself. "Oh yes, you do," said Dumbledore, still more calmly. "You have lost those closest to you. Of course you care." "You don't know how I feel," Harry roared. "You standing there, you." But words were no longer enough. Smashing things was no more help. He wanted to run. He wanted to keep running and never look back. He wanted to be somewhere he could not see those clear blue eyes staring at him, that hatefully calm old face. "By all means, continue destroying my possessions," said Dumbledore serenely. "I dare say I have too many." In this text, I think we have a great image of lament in which Harry is trying to express the rage he feels, and yet Dumbledore sits with him and is completely patient and calm and receives him as he is, allowing him to feel those emotions and expressing them in whatever way he needs to. And this happens within the context of a close relationship between the two. Harry doesn't just go to him out of the blue, but rather Harry begins expressing this to him precisely because they know each other so well. And this, I think, highlights something, an insight from Rowan Williams, the Anglican Dumbledore, who writes, "Blasphemy resists the conspiracy of silence about the agonizing difficulties of belief, resists the stifling of a real and honest response to an unjust world. It is in light of all this that, for many religious people, legislating against blasphemy is a deeply ironic thing. The project of punishing blasphemy with the fullest rigor of the law can imply a God anxious about his safety, whose power is uncomfortably, like any arbitrary human power, insecure and needing to be held in place by violence. Legislating against blasphemy is always in danger of suggesting that God needs human protection, and that faith is so frail that it cannot survive exposure to honest human emotion or intelligence." Now, at the end of Job, I think we see the truth of this insight, that God ends up vindicating Job while chastising those who are trying to defend God against Job's accusations. If we look, for instance, at Job's friend Eliphaz, he tells Job at one point, "Agree with God and be at peace. In this way, good will come to you. Receive instruction from his mouth and lay up his words in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be restored. If you remove unrighteousness from your tents, if you treat gold like dust, and gold of Ophir like the stones of the torrent bed, and if the Almighty is your gold and your precious silver, then you will delight in the Almighty and lift up your face to God. You will pray to him, and he will hear you, and you will pay your vows." The interesting thing is that that doesn't sound too bad. He's not entirely wrong theologically, but he's giving an improper response to the situation. He is not taking Job's specific situation into account. And instead of sitting with Job and feeling his emotions with him, he instead tries to defend God against Job's accusations. And then at the end, we come to a very interesting passage. After God has responded to Job, and Job likewise responds to God, it says, "After the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, 'My wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now therefore take 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer up yourselves a burnt offering. And my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. For you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has done.' So Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite went and did what the Lord had told them. And the Lord accepted Job's prayer." So here we have the supreme irony. It is Job, the one who blasphemes, whom God vindicates, while God's wrath is kindled against those who tried to defend God and repress what Job was saying. God accuses Job's friends of sin, but he never accuses Job of sin. Job is described as blameless at the beginning of the book. He commits blasphemy, and by the end of the book is still blameless. And not only that, Job, this blameless blasphemer, is the only one God will listen to. Now, this can remind us of something else where we also hear another one crying out to God. Because this tradition of lament is also carried up by Jesus when he is on the cross and quotes Psalm 22, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This is reminiscent of Job. You have a blameless man who has had everything taken from him and who cries out to God and is vindicated in the end. And just as Job was able to intercede on behalf of his friends, so Christ also intercedes on our behalf. And so we can pray, we can be completely honest with God, knowing that God is able to receive us, all that we are, that God is loving, patient, kind, and that God is not there to violently punish any wrong feeling, quote unquote, that we might have, but rather even respects it and responds properly to it. Because with God wants us to have a genuine relationship, and that includes the entire range of human emotion. And so we can pray with full confidence that Christ is also praying on our behalf. Because we have these examples in Scripture which highlight that God is a God of love and patience, the God who welcomes us, the God who understands that sometimes, in order to have an honest relationship with a just God in an unjust world, we need to level charges. But this relationship, of course, is not just about accusations. It is also one of praise and of love, of tenderheartedness, of compassion. It is because of this genuine relationship that we can be honest and open before God, just as Harry could be open and honest with Dumbledore. And so with this, may we have the courage to be like Job and to be like Christ, to be these blameless blasphemers, all the while trusting God to come to our aid and vindicate us. Because in so doing, we can confidently claim, along with Job, I know that my Redeemer lives. Amen.